Hello and welcome to our walkthrough of the Eduqas GCSE Media Studies Component 1 set text, a poster for the James Bond film Spectre. Throughout this PowerPoint video, I'll be asking you to press pause and answer some questions, so please do so every time you see this pause button. Context. Spectre was a James Bond film released on 26th of October 2015, starring Daniel Craig as 007 in his fourth performance as the fictional MI6 agent. The film was loosely based on characters and stories from the late Ian Fleming, whose name appears in the poster, although less prominently than those of the 60s and 70s, for example right next to the title in this poster from The Man with the Golden Gun. This is because at this point in the franchise, the films are not straight adaptations from Fleming's novels, but nonetheless use characters and scenarios from them. The film was a global franchise produced by the British company Eon, Everything or Nothing Productions for MGM and Columbia, and distributed by Sony. At an estimated budget of $245 million, making it the most expensive Bond film to date, it grossed over $880 million at the worldwide box office, making it a commercial success. Despite the gains of feminism by 2015, this poster demonstrates that the film industry continues to be dominated by men. The most prominent credits all refer to men. Albert R. Broccoli's Eon Production presents Daniel Craig as Ian Fleming's James Bond, reflecting the many iconic male figures involved in creating the franchise. And the film's major roles, both hero and villain, are both male. The film was also scripted by 4 men. Spectre was directed by Sam Mendes, pictured here balancing a head onto Daniel Craig's shoulder, who was behind the previous Bond film Skyfall, which was a critical and commercial success. Mendes is an Oscar-winning director, and his involvement has helped raise the reputation of the franchise, at least among critics. Considering this is 2015, we do see a larger female presence in the credits compared to posters of the 60s and 70s, including actresses Naomi Harris, Lea Seydoux and Monica Bellucci, costume designer Janie Tamaim, and producer Barbara Broccoli, daughter of longtime Bond producer Albert R. Broccoli, demonstrating some progressive changes. For cultural context, we need to know that the masked man in the background is wearing a skeleton mask, used to symbolize the traditional Mexican festival of the Day of the Dead. The film features a Day of the Dead parade in Mexico City. Such a parade didn't exist at that point, but is now a large event in Mexico, having been directly inspired by the film. However, this arguably continues the Bond film's history of presenting other cultures as different and exotic, perhaps influenced by colonial ideology. The skeleton and title Spectre could refer to ghosts from Bond's past and may reflect a more personal and intimate exploration of the character, possibly to avoid audience fatigue with a franchise that has been running since 1962. It has been argued that the Tom Ford white tuxedo worn by Daniel Craig revived a fashion trend from the 1970s. Previous Bonds have worn a similar white tuxedo, for example Sean Connery here in Goldfinger. And many celebrities, including David Beckham and Benedict Cumberbatch, were photographed wearing a similar white tuxedo around the time of the release of Spectre, underlining the cultural significance of the Bond franchise. So here is a good time to pause and answer some questions. In what year was the film released? Who was its star and how many times has he appeared as Bond before this film? Who produced and distributed the film? How can you tell from the credits that the film industry continued to be male-dominated in 2015? What differences do you know about the number of women involved in the film's production compared to The Man with the Golden Gun? Who directed the film, and why did his involvement raise the franchise's reputation among critics? What does the mask in the background symbolize? What previous Bond film did the white tuxedo appear in? Which celebrities were pictured wearing a white tuxedo around the film's release? What significance does this demonstrate the Bond franchise has? Media language. The poster follows the generic codes and conventions of action posters. We can see this through the repertoire of elements, the iconography of the genre. Firstly, we see a gun, which is a common prop used in the action thriller genre, so audiences can expect violence, action and danger. We also have an action hero who is smartly dressed, looking strong and intently towards the camera, which is a trope used in many action films. The poster clearly establishes itself as part of the James Bond film franchise for the use of the following iconography. The white tuxedo, which connotes luxury, wealth and sophistication, the high life that Bond enjoys, martinis, women, gambling, etc. This is an intertextual reference to the earlier Bond films. Previous Bonds have worn the white tuxedo, including Connery and Goldfinger. The providing a sense of familiarity, nostalgia and pleasure to fans who recognise the link. The reference to author Ian Fleming and the 007 logo, used in 2 places, also firmly attached the poster to the franchise. We also see signifiers of romance and action, both typical elements of a Bond film. The red carnation has connotations of passion, but also danger. The poster also makes use of various narrative codes and conventions. The central image is a long shot of James Bond smartly dressed, arms folded with the gun pointing to his left, connoting power and dominance. This suggests that he is the film's protagonist and so probably a good guy. According to Vladimir Prop's theory, he would be considered the hero. This is reinforced by the use of colour. Bond's white jacket connotes purity, also signifying that he is a good character, even though he's clearly a misogynistic and arrogant sexual predator who throughout international law regularly puts innocent lives at risk and murders without conscience or sufficient oversight, but maybe that's just me. Bond is looking directly at the audience, seemingly making eye contact. This direct mode of address is a common convention of film posters and helps to build a pseudo-personal connection with the audience. The intensity of his stare and the lack of a smile signifies that he is a threat. This is juxtaposed, contrasted with a dark, shadowed figure in the background, who the audience is led to believe is the film's antagonist or Propian villain, as the skull mask is an iconic symbol of death. These 2 conflicting images construct a binary opposition of good versus evil, a typical convention of the action genre, and is likely to lead to the film's disequilibrium, applying Todorov's theory of narrative conventions. The skeleton has connotations of death and danger, and the mask is covering up someone's identity, someone who wishes to remain hidden, signifying criminality as someone or something, a ghost, spectre, lurking in the shadows. The title Spectre relates to the organisation that is in opposition to Bond in the narrative, but also signifies a ghost, possibly from Bond's past. The gold font connotes luxury, wealth, aspiration and exclusivity. The capitalised title suggests power and strength. Okay, let's pause again and answer some questions. In what ways does the poster follow the codes and conventions of the action genre? How does the poster establish itself as part of the Bond franchise? What intertextual reference is made through the use of costume? What may this provide Bond fans? How is Bond established as a Propian hero? How does the image of the skull create a sense of narrative? Think disequilibrium, binary opposition and Propian characters. What does the title and its typography signify and or connote? Representation. The poster reinforces patriarchal ideology in its representation of gender. The image of Bond reinforces the stereotype that men are strong, confident, independent and powerful. This is communicated through the use of props. Bond's gun connotes power and dominance. Dress codes, his tuxedo signifies his wealth and high status. And non-verbal codes, his direct mode of address, emotionless expression and strong, dominant posture with arms folded confidently, signify that he is a professional, rational and ruthless assassin who is unafraid of danger. And the low-key lighting on Bond's face, which highlights his chiseled features, constructing a representation of tough, inscrutable masculinity. This hero archetype is typical of the action genre, and audiences are led to believe through this representation that this is how a man should be. The apparent villain in the background is also male, reflecting the male-dominated nature of the franchise, as male characters, both protagonist and antagonist, appear to drive the narrative. The representation of women in the franchise has traditionally been similarly stereotypical. The Bond girl, who is the beautiful love interest for Bond, a Propian princess, insignificant to the narrative and ultimately disposable. She is either a sexual conquest to demonstrate his attractiveness or a damsel in distress to demonstrate his heroic power, or both. However, in this particular poster, women are absent and therefore underrepresented, possibly signifying their inability to deal with the serious and dangerous missions, reinforcing sexist and patriarchal female stereotypes. There are strong female characters in Spectre, however this poster does not feature them, and so we can infer that much of the marketing prioritises Bond as an iconic figure who will appeal to audiences. It may also be due to the male dominance of the film industry, particularly the action genre, which mostly caters for a male audience. The representation of gender in the Bond franchise has evolved over time to an extent to reflect the changing social context. Craig's Bond is not as sexist and overtly stereotypical as the earlier incarnations, and reflects some contemporary notions of masculinity. Craig's Bond is older, more thoughtful, and shows signs of vulnerability, possibly haunted by this mysterious spectre. The poster's only reference to other cultures is through the use of the skeleton mask, an iconic symbol from Mexico's Day of the Dead celebration. However, it is positioned in the shadows behind Bond, arguably presenting foreign cultures as dangerous, reinforcing colonial ideology. And here is the last set of questions. What male stereotypes does the poster reinforce? How do the props, dress codes, non-verbal codes reinforce these stereotypes? How does the poster support patriarchal ideology in its representation of men and women? How does the representation of gender in Spectre compare to earlier Bond film posters of the 60s and 70s? How does the representation of other cultures arguably reinforce colonial ideology? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out our other videos. Email us if you have any questions and keep up to date with what's happening in media studies by following us on Twitter.